Yeah? All right. All right. Right, so we didn't really successfully finish the Ayin that we were discussing yesterday on top of the page Ayin Dalet, where the Rebbe is explaining why it is that between Atzilus and Biyah it is sufficient to have a parsa, not a complete tzimtzum, a complete withdrawal of the oir, whereas between oir in soif lifnei tzimtzum and ak and that which comes after the kav, there had to be a total withdrawal, a tzimtzum. That's called total withdrawal of the oir and reintroduction. By the parsa there was no withdrawal and introduction, it was just a reduction of the same oir.
Parsa is like interruption, right?
Interruption, a curtain that interrupts, something that interrupts. Interference. And so we try to get into it in the nitty-gritty to have, so to speak, a grasp of the Inyan. Essentially, what we used as a metaphor, and it's not really a metaphor, it is the same Inyan in a different level. The Inyan how it the oil comes from Rotzen HaNefesh into Chochmah, into Seichel, and how it comes from Chochmah into Bina. Atzilus versus Bria. Atzilus is like Chochmah, and Bria is Bina. And the oil is actually Lifnei HaTzimtzum, which is like the Keser. And there it's a completely different kind of oil, and to come into being an oil hashayach le'olemus, it needed to be a complete tzimtzum, because that oil has no shayachas to olemus, as we've discussed many times. What is the quality that makes it shayachas le'olemus? Whereas when Atzilus Biyah, and in our metaphor from Chochmah into Bina, even though it's a different level, very much a different level, but nevertheless it is Chochmah that is drawn into Bina. It's not something different. And therefore, there it is sufficient to have a parsa. Hello?
Hello?
Yes. What did you say? All right, so we will start from the third line down on Kufayin Dalet. So we said that the oil from an oil in Seif had to go through a total tzimtzum in order that the oil should be be'erech oilus. But me'atzilus libiyah, from atzilus into biyah, liyois the klolus ha'oir, being that the oil overall, which means klolus ha'oir, at that point, the oil, even though atzilus and biyah are very different, but it is nevertheless also within the realm of world. Therefore, the closer oir is ushenim dad lefiyerach oilmus. It is an oir that was measured in proximity to worlds. And as we tried to discuss yesterday, that even though Chochmah observes the entire reality, the entire truth, but it observes it in a measured manner. That you take it from its source and bring it down. It's not that you are actually imbued within the source. It's measured and it comes through. Therefore, shayach behislapshus. Therefore, in that oir, because there is a measure to that oir, shayach behislapshus. Hislapshus is possible in that oir. What is the principle of hislapshus? The principle of hislapshus is that the oir can be contained within a keli without breaking the keli, without nullifying the keli. Even though it is a very bright oir, and the keli is almost inadvertent, but nevertheless the keli is there. An oil that is bli gvul is not shaykh to hislapshus. Oil that has any kind of measure, any kind of definition, is shaykh behislapshus. And the whole inyan of Atzilus versus Biyah, like we said, Chochmah versus Bina, is that Bina is everything is Bekelim. And Chochmah there's also what's called Kli HaChochmah, but it's the Keli is totally non-functional, so to speak. The oil comes right through. This is like we point out that like Re'i or sight, there's also a Keli, there's the eyes. But the eye is not a Keli that alters the oil in any which way. But nevertheless, it is a Keli. It goes through the eye. The eyes, definitely, even though, we pointed out the other day, even though with the eyes you observe the entire panorama, and as a result of observing the entire panorama, you're observing even that which you don't see, even that which is, so to speak, behind you. But you're not in fact seeing that which is behind you. You see only that which comes from the Keli. That's what it is, and there's a shayach behislapshus. And therefore, while behislapshus parso, and then, as a result of this oir being mislabish in the parsa, coming into the parsa, and being produced through a curtain, to a further limit, nase be'erech biyah. Therefore, this oil becomes be'erech biyah. Be'erech biyah means it is then possible to formulate kelim of biyah for this oil. Again, in our metaphor, it is between Chochmah and Bina. There is definitely some kind of an interruption. Like we're starting Tanya now. So the Alter Rebbe describes the process from Chochmah into Bina. It says Chochmah, a few more days. And the Chochmah is koyach ma. Koyach ma means a koyach that can hardly be identified as a presence. Ma. There is also Kli HaChochmah and so forth, but nevertheless, the Keli is not observable. There is no substance to it. No substance to the Keli. And that is called, who a maskil called Dover. There is, his maskil, he understands everything. Why does he understand him in discussion last night? Because he is actually observing the source of the oil. Maskil called Dover. Then comes into Bina. The process, the way it comes into Bina, is not a smooth sail. From Baal Chochmah it pours over into Bina. Doesn't happen that way. Then he has to first, after he already had this insight of Chochmah, he has to now focus in and be misboinen in that which he understood. Which means it's a completely separate step. There's an interruption. Okay, the Chochmah, while the Chochmah is in full vision, you can't even apply Bina. And you should not apply Bina, because if you do, then you lose the brightness, you lose the message of the Chochmah, the truth that Chochmah brings with it. This is what we also always discuss. If you try to grab, so to speak, with the Kelim, with the Gashmisik Kelim, the oil, then you lose the whole phenomenon of the oil. Just like in the experience of sight. If you focus on the size of this tree and the size of this lake, you lose the sense of the panorama. You lose the value of the sight effect. The sight, as you said, you see the sky itself, and everything is in there, has the background of the sky. That's what sight is. And if you focus in, we say, oh no, real vision is when you identify the elements that this is comprised of. That's not real vision. Then you lose the whole benefit of vision. So the same thing is between Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah, as a matter of fact, as it says, comes like a Borog HaMavrik. The Gilu of Chochmah is like a Borog HaMavrik, like a spark. A spark cannot be grasped, and essentially the spark hardly has any form. It's just a bright illumination. But once you've had that spark, then you sense what this message, what this seichel behind it is, and you can focus in it and draw from it and create Bina. It's a separate creation. But even though it's a separate creation, you're actually drawing from the vision of Chochmah itself, because that oil was already mislabesh in a keli. That means lapshus behapas, because as it says that be'emerson the Borog HaMavrik. Just one more thing. I want to finish the whole thing. If whatever we get, the Borog HaMavrik really is called the Gilui HaChochmah. It's called the Chitzonius HaChochmah. The Chochmah is an inherent element in the human being. For example, even while the person is not involved in any seichel, he's not pursuing any seichel, he's not engaged in trying to figure something out and get an insight or anything like that. Even in normal operation, you have the Ayin that should he be confronted with any kind of a situation, any kind of challenge, he will approach it with seichel. He will not respond to it without consideration. Why will he approach it with seichel? Because he is a bar seichel. Because he is a bar das, it's called. By him, the reality is defined by his seichel, not by his gut. Within that reality that he perceives, the reality, the deeper essence of that is the inherent chokhmah. And when he has a specific inyan, he draws into that, and he delves into that, and he draws a spark from the chokhmah to explain a specific inyan. This is the spark. So the spark is already a gili, already has a form. And therefore, this oil is already modeled, measured according to the oilments, and therefore the Yishai by his lapshus, that can be ultimately mislabish, that can ultimately be identified in Kalim, and therefore it becomes be'erech biyah. And therefore, and in that process, between achilas and biyah, it's sufficient to have a parsa. It doesn't need a complete transformation of the oil through a tzimtzum. Whereas the oil, the way it comes from oil in soif into seder hishtalshelus, there has to be a complete transformation of the oil. It has to be from oil that is not shaykh loylamas altogether, oil in soif, into oil that has a shachas loylamas. And as we explained many times, the primary shachas loylamas is that there is a sense in that oil that there was a moment where it wasn't and now it is. This is a principle necessary in oilams. There has to be absence and presence. If there is only presence, it has no shachas loylamas. V'yesh bozeh ma'ilo. Now, the Rebbe points out an interesting thing. Yesh bozeh ma'ilo. In this phenomenon, this process, the fact that the oil comes through the parsa, even though it means that the oil to begin with is not that kind of oil, that supreme kind of oil. It's an oil that has a shachas loyalness. Nevertheless, there is a mila in this process. Why? Masha his havos, who the fact that his havos is alidei his lapshus hamehus. But his havos in biyah, his havos, the creation of biyah, is alidei his lapshus hamehus. It's the fact that the mahus means the very essence of the oil ha-chochma, of the oil ha-tzilus, is mislabish into the pars. This is he says it very briefly, but I want to point out to this. Again, going back to our metaphor of the Chokhmah and Bina. We discussed many times. I said before that when a person is involved in Bina, in identifying all the details, all the ramifications of a certain inyan, he must keep the brightness and the principle of the principle that he's dealing with always in a focused position. Look at this Slapshus Hamahus. Let's take again a morsel for this. I think this is an important thing to understand. If you travel from point A to point B, and this travel entails a long trek, many different routes, many different sections, many different parts, and each part requires a different kind of attention, different kind of facilities, whatever it is. And for each leg of your journey, you have to provide attention, and you have to figure out how to cover it and so forth, how to get to the next leg. It is important for you to maintain the spirit and the sense of the ultimate goal that set you on the journey in the first place. Even though right now the ultimate goal is a little bit elusive. But nevertheless, that is really the spirit that carries it throughout in all the trials of the journey. The overcoming the immediate challenge is not going to keep you going. You get stuck in traffic, and you see the traffic going the other way, free and open. So you say, okay, let me turn around. That's much easier, much more pleasant to drive. You turn around and go the other way. Why should I struggle with this traffic? Sounds ludicrous. It's not. Because if we would not sense, what is our ultimate goal, this would be the tendency. And this is in fact what happens when people go in beruchnis in circles. You go and suddenly you turn around. Oh, there's a more pleasant route. It's not a question of the pleasant route. It's a question of what's the spirit behind your struggle. And this is pshat that is slapshus hamahus. That the chochmah, the oir ha-chochmah, the oir ha-tzilus, is not a remote view. This is actually what is the motivative factor behind the bina. Because bina on its own it does not provide its impetus. What's the big deal? Like we pointed out the other day, a teacher is teaching children and he's teaching them Kometz Aleph O. And he has to struggle, he has to practice and all that. And then he says, what's the point? What am I teaching them? The only thing that really, so to speak, keep the spirit on is because he sees in this AyinBase the whole Torah that the children will eventually draw as a result. And the Kometz Aleph, like it's pointed out all the time, that we start teaching children from Kometz Aleph because this is the Kometz Aleph that Onoichi Hashem Elokecha, Onoichi starts with. That's where we start. That's where we start from Kometz Aleph. In other words, it's the real thing. It's part of the real thing, except it's the chitzenius of it. The slapshus hamahus. Therefore, there is slapshus hamahus. You have the actual oir hatzilus. And the same thing in Bina, you have the actual oir ha-chochmah. And chochmah, it's a proper moshel, absolutely, because that's what it says. that Chokhmah is the source. This is what brings Chayus. Life of the neshama is brought into the koiches hanefesh through Chokhmah. So this is the from his slapshus. In the slapshus, there's a big mile that you have the slapshus amahus. Avol behagilui shehoir. But if you talk about the gilui of the oir, not the mahus, not the actual presence, but the gilui. The gilui means the brightness. Yesh behagilui shalidei hatzimtzum. There, the gilui that comes to the tzimtzum, there is Milo Gdoilo. There is a great Milo Legabe Inyan Hapars. In comparison or relative to the Inyan Hapars. Even though this is a Tzimtzum, this is the Parsa. And the Parsa does not recreate a new oir. And the Tzimtzum does retranslate the oir. And yet, the Gil Shaltiyat Tzimtzum, in terms of the Gilui oir, there is a mile relative to the Pars. What is the mile? Again, we'll go through this and then we'll try to discuss it in our terms. The hislapshus behaparso, because the fact that there is that in the parsa there is hislapshus, that the oil becomes mislabish. That means it assumes the actual position of the parsa. Ho'inyan akob. It has the phenomenon akob. Akob means being held up in the parsa. It's not a straight flow. It actually is retained there. Sheho'er mis'akiv behaparsa. That the oil is held back in the parsa. Ve'inyan ho'akobahu, and the principle of akoba, of the held back, sheho'er mishave. The principle of akoba is that the oil becomes kimahuz ha'dovo shemisakiv bey. It becomes like the reality of the thing in which it is misakiv, in which it is being held back. So this will require a lot of discussion. Let me just introduce the subject and then we'll go. The nefesh is mislabesh in the guf. That's what is slapshus. There is no question that we can identify guf and nefesh. We can say this is life, this is nefesh, but the guf on its own does not have life. But the interrelationship between the nefesh and the guf is such that the guf itself comes to life. It doesn't live on its own. It doesn't have life of its own. But the nefesh is so mislabish and so imbued in the guf to the extent that the guf itself comes to life. Now the guf coming to life, the guf has nothing to do with life. What does this mean? It means that the life force of the nefesh has been so reduced to the point where it can actually be at the level of that the goof is alive. But the goof is alive. That's what is slapshus. And it becomes kimahus, the life force, the life element of the neshama, of the nefesh, becomes kimahus hadovish mislavish be. Becomes physical life. Physical life versus neshama life, it's losing the whole sensitivity of it. But sensitivity of life it loses, but it is the real mahus. Where do we identify this sensitivity it loses and mahus it retains? So sensitivity, we can talk a lot about that. We don't have to discuss them. We know that we lose. But then there's no possibility in the goof to understand, to perceive that which the neshama perceives. But we have the mahus. What is the mahus? The goof comes to life. What is the goof without life? It disintegrates in no time. And here, not only it retains, can retain indefinitely. And it rejuvenates all the time. It has an eternity element, even to the extent that it can be damaged and healed. There's no real damage. We say, we always point out, you have a cut in the finger, big deal. What do you mean big deal? The finger is cut. No, but it's alive. You can't really cut it. There is inherent reality in it. But it's nowhere near the sensitivity of the nefesh is. In order to recognize the sensitivity of the nefesh, you have to labor very hard to refine the goof to be able to relate to it. Okay, this is it for this morning. Hello? Have a good day.
His lapis is the hakava.
Huh?
The hakava. That's his lapis we've been talking about?
Right, the slapshus is hakava. Hakava means that it becomes like the mahus of the Dovashim Slavish way.
Like the mahus of the Kali, so it takes on.
Huh?
That sounds familiar. I remember.